Hi there, and welcome to The Artist Craft. I'm your host, Stacey Cochran, and we have an excellent guest in studio today. Mary Kay Andrews is on tour for Deep Dish. Mary Kay is the author of Blue Christmas, Savannah Blues, Little Bitty Lies, and Hissy Fit. A former reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, her latest novel is Deep Dish. She lives in Atlanta with her family and is currently at work on her next novel, Fixer Upper. Thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Stacey. It's a pleasure.
Well, now, I understand that you visited Paula Deen's home cooking in doing some research for Deep Dish. What was that experience like?
Well, it was a lot of fun and really educational. She shoots her show in her home in Savannah, Georgia. She shoots the home cooking show there. She shoots her other show, Paula's Party, at her brother's restaurant, which is, just a couple of miles away. But it's amazing to see the backstage effort that goes into a cooking show. They set up an entire prep kitchen in her garage, which is not air conditioned. If you can imagine what that's like in Savannah in, say, May. And there's a huge crew, prep chefs and stylists and lighting and sound and camera. So it's quite a production. It's fascinating.
So what did you learn about television production? I know that factors into a lot of what's in Deep Dish through going to the set and experiencing the show.
Well, you learn all kinds of things, such as when she's stirring a pot. There are 3 pots underneath the counter that you don't see at the different stages of the recipe. And all of the ingredients, everything that goes into a dish, she's preparing on camera. Off camera, a whole prep crew has prepared, and they have what they call swap outs. So when she opens an oven, she puts something in the oven, and a moment later she takes it out. That's called a swap out. And there are things they call counter beauty, which means they've got the finish. For instance, if it's a pie, it's all beautifully browned, and it's on a gorgeous dish, and it has a lovely, colorful dish towel tucked under it, and maybe an arrangement of all the ingredients that went with it. That's called a counter beauty shot. So it was a lot of fun to learn all of the sort of production words. I love that kind of, backstage kinds of stuff. So, and how hard everybody works. But she's, it was fun getting to know her. She's very genuine and funny and earthy. So I really enjoyed myself. That's
pretty cool. If you're just tuning in, this is The Artist Craft, and I'm your host, Stacey Cochran. The guest today is Mary Kay Andrews, and the book is Deep Dish. It's absolutely hilarious. I saw you last night at Quail Ridge Books, and the audience was just on the edge of their seat, laughing at some of the readings. So would you like to do a little bit of a reading from the book?
I'd be happy to.
That'd be awesome.
One more week. Gina repeated the words to herself as she stood on the set, her makeup already starting to melt under the hot lights trained on her. 5 more days, 2 shows a day, 10 shows, and the season would be over. She would have 2 weeks to rest. 2 weeks with no makeup, no heels, no cameras. She would let her jaw muscles relax, not smile for 14 days. No cooking either, she vowed, knowing immediately that was one promise she couldn't keep. Right now, she might be sick of smiling, sick of staring into a camera, sick of explaining why you had to let a roast rest before carving it, sick of chopping, dicing, slicing, and sautéing. But that would pass, she told herself. Just 10 more shows. Ready, Jess asked from just off camera. Gina took a deep breath and smiled up at the camera trained on her. Ready. Her brow wrinkled in intense concentration as she carefully whisked the Parmesan cheese into the bubbling pot of grits on the front burner of the cooktop. Turn the pot toward the camera so we can see the label, Jess said quietly from the table where she usually sat beside Scott, watching through the monitor on the laptop. Where was Scott? Gina wondered. Jessica DeRosa, his assistant producer, was only 24, just a couple years out of film school, and she was probably quite capable of directing a show on her own. But Scott was such a control freak, he rarely let her. Without warning, the gas flame under the pot flared up and then just as suddenly died. Gina stared down at it, grimacing in disbelief. "You're frowning," Jess commented. "Come on, Gina, don't make it look so hard. Remember what Scott says, these recipes should look so easy a trained chimp could fix them blindfolded." The cameraman snickered and Gina looked up to give Eddie a stare of disapproval. "Not funny," she said. But it wasn't Eddie, the overweight, balding veteran of 3 seasons worth of her shows, behind the camera. This cameraman was a kid, with a frizzy shock of blonde hair sticking out from under a red bandana worn pirate-like around his forehead. Where was Eddie, she wondered. Were he and Scott in some kind of meeting elsewhere, maybe over at the Georgia Public Broadcasting offices? "I'm not frowning because the recipe won't work," Gina said. "The darn stove is on the fritz again. The flame keeps flickering out. I thought Scott said we were going to get a new stove before the season was over." Jess shrugged. "I guess we're just going to make do with this one for one last week. Does it make any difference?" "Only if we want viewers to believe I know better than to try to cook grits on a cold stove." "Keep stirring," Jess advised, and smiling. "Perky, that's what Scott always insisted on. Nobody really cared how your food tasted as long as you looked perky and happy while you were fixing it. And sexy," which was why she was wearing a scoop-neck tank top that showed off her tan shoulders and shapely arms, instead of the bib apron with Gina Foxton embroidered on it in flowing script that she'd worn the previous season, before Scott took over the show and her career. "Now add the cheese," Jess called, "and tell us why you need to keep stirring." Gina made a show of turning down the burner, even though in reality the burner was stone cold and now seemingly inoperative. "Once your grits reach the boiling point, you want to turn the heat way down to keep them from burning," she said. "Now whisk in your cheese, which you've already grated, and if it looks too thick, you can add some more of the cream to make sure you've got the right consistency." She reached for the bowl of Parmesan and dumped it into the hot grits, stirring rapidly. But now, Jess's directions to the contrary, she was frowning again. She sniffed as her nose, always hypersensitive, alerted her that something was amiss. What was that smell? She sniffed again and realized with horror that the aroma wafting from the pot was not the honest corn smell of her stone-ground grits, nor the smell of homemade chicken stock, nor the fresh scent of cooking cream. No, this smell resembled nothing more than the stink of melting polymer. "God, y'all!" Gina exclaimed, shoving the offending pot away toward the back burner. "This stuff reeks!" As sometimes happened, usually when she was overexcited or totally aggravated, her carefully moderated accent eradication coaching fell away in an instant. "Jesus H, you know what," Gina said. "What is this stuff?" The kid behind the camera guffawed. Jess blinked innocently. "What?" Gina reached over to the tray of ingredients her prep cook had placed on the countertop and grabbed the plastic tub of grated cheese. Without her reading glasses, she had to hold the tub right up to her face to read the label. "Cheesies? Is this what we've come to? Y'all have sold my soul for a tub of $1.98 artificial cheese made out of recycled dry cleaning bags." "Please, Gina," Jess said quietly. "Can we just finish this segment?" Gina dipped a spoon into the pot of grits and tasted. "I knew it," she said. "And that's not cream either. Since when do we substitute canned condensed milk for cream?" Jess stared down at her notes, then looked up, a pained expression on her face. "We're having budget issues. Scott told the girls they should substitute cheaper ingredients whenever necessary." "He didn't say anything about it to me," Jess said, walking off the step and toward the table where Jess sat. She hated to make a scene, hated to come across as a prima donna or a food snob, but you couldn't have a show about healthy Southern cooking, a show called Fresh Start for heaven's sake, if you started to compromise on ingredients. "Jess," Gina said calmly, "what's going on around here?" Jessica's pale, usually cheerful face reddened. "Let's take a break," she said. "Everybody back in 10 minutes."
Awesome. Well, I tell you what ingredients are working well, and that's the ingredients in Deep Dish. The author is Mary Kay Andrews, and the book is Deep Dish. You said that you wanted to write a book that was sort of the focus of it is, you know, when men and women compete for the same things.
Right.
What conclusions have you drawn through writing the book?
Well, I think whenever anybody competes, somebody has to win and somebody has to lose, and eventually somebody has to make a compromise. And so that was sort of the crux of the issue in writing the book. Who backs away? What compromises are made, and what is given up? And you know, the other part of the book was writing about food and writing about a young woman who has to reinvent herself when her career falls apart and she's forced to face the facts that her life isn't working out the way she'd planned it. And she kind of has to back away a little bit and take stock of the situation.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about sort of the craft of writing. A lot of the audience that we have for the Artist Craft here are composed of aspiring writers themselves.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about how writing for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution prepared you as a writer.
Well, I think I worked in newspapers for 14 years, and the last 10 years of my career at the Atlanta Constitution, which is a daily paper. So working on a daily deadline is great training. It teaches you to respect your craft, and it teaches you that some days you just have to write, even if you don't feel like it, even if it's not coming well. It also teaches you, when you're a journalist, you're interviewing people and asking questions, and accuracy is everything. So it really trains you to listen carefully to what people say, and not just what they say, but how they say it. Especially with new journalism, you're trying to capture the nuances. If you ask somebody a question, it's not enough to report their answer. You also have to be watching their face to see, you know, are they lying? Are they hesitating? Have you struck some kind of a chord with your question? And you have to write about setting. You have to be observant about the setting. My books are always set in the South. I never lived outside the South. So that's important to me, to know the names of things. When they go in Deep Dish, they go to a barrier island off the coast of Georgia. And I had to know the names of plants and animals and things that she would observe. So journalism is great training for that, for listening and observing, and also for meeting deadlines. When I first sold my first book, my editor said to me, the thing I like about working with you is that you're a pro. And I am a pro. I know that if I have a deadline, I have to have my work complete. I have to have clean copy. And at this stage of the game, there's no, the dog ate my homework excuses.
Did you ever feel that you had to do more as a woman, as a reporter, at a big newspaper like that than your male counterparts?
Yeah. There were days when I felt that, especially with a hard breaking news story, I would have to fight to be assigned to the story because their natural inclination would have been, and of course I've been out of newspapers for 17 years. I think the field has been leveled somewhat. But yeah, when I was a young reporter, I would have to sort of fight and scrap to get a good hard news story assigned to myself, to work the police beat. When I started in journalism in 1977, they didn't let women be the cop shop reporter. That was a man's job. I mean, I got sent to cover Kiwanis meetings or fashion shows or beauty pageants, but not a murder story.
Was that humiliating or degrading in any way, or did you just...
No, it just made me mad, which was a good thing because it made me more resolved to work harder and to work on my craft. And maybe at that stage of the game, I really wasn't ready to cover, as a 22-year-old, to cover a breaking hard news story of a homicide or whatever. So I think the good thing for me is when I get frustrated, I just work harder.
Now, one news story that you did cover was the true life story that formed the basis for Midnight in the Garden
Right.
of Good and Evil. How did covering that real life story, the murder trial, how did that influence your writing?
Well, there were so many backstories and side issues to covering those murder trials. Jim Williams was an antique dealer in Savannah, and he was eventually put on trial 3 times for murdering his young lover. And I covered 2 of the trials, and so it was great training to learn how the judicial system works and how it doesn't work, how backroom deals work. And Savannah, Jim Williams was a very socially accepted person in Savannah. Lots of influential people knew him and liked him and had a hard time believing that he would kill this young man. And so there were all kinds of side issues. And of course, the Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, that wasn't a book I would have ever written. I would have written about the trial. I wouldn't have known about a Lady Chablis. I wouldn't have known about, even though I was living and working in Savannah during those trials, John Barrett came to Savannah after all the trials were over, actually just shortly before Jim Williams died. So I think it took an outsider to see Savannah through a fresh set of eyes, which I didn't really have.
Now, who is Kathy Hogan Trocheck?
Kathy Hogan Trocheck is my real name. That's who I am at home.
And you wrote a number of successful mysteries
Right.
under your real name. Why did you start out as a mystery writer?
Well, I'd always been fascinated with crime. My uncle was a longtime police officer. He retired as a chief of police in Florida. And my family used to go to my grandmother's every Sunday for big family dinner. And my uncle would talk about whatever cases he was working. So I was always fascinated in journalism. I was interested in crime. I'd been a crime reporter as a newspaper reporter. And I read a lot of mysteries, starting with when I was a kid. I read, you know, the Perry Masons and the...
It was what you liked.
Well, yeah, that's what I read. And so when I decided I would try to start writing fiction, I had heard, you know, write what you know. And since I was reading mysteries, it just seemed natural that I would try to write a mystery.
Well, if you had a writer come to you and say, you know, I'm on the verge of selling my first big mystery book to HarperCollins or a major publisher
Right.
like HarperCollins, what advice would you give them if they asked you about, should I be writing a series or trying to write standalones straight out of the gate?
Well, I think I would ask them what kind of a story they had, if they had a protagonist that they felt could tell a long series of stories. You know, when you write a mystery series, you might be with that protagonist for 20 books. I mean, Sue Grafton is, you know, working her way through the alphabet. She's on T. So she spent a long time with Kinsey Mulhone. And, you know, even when you write one book, that's a year, at least a year out of your life. So my advice would be to ask the writer, is this really a character that you care about? Are they compelling? Have you created a character who has enough nuances and enough of an interesting backstory that they can go the distance? And, you know, I started writing mysteries 17 years ago, and it's gotten a lot harder to break into the business. When I started, publishers were very interested in buying women's sleuths, which was what my Callahan Garrity mystery series was. And they were interested in publishing mysteries that were set outside of New York or California. And the Callahan series was set in Atlanta. So the other part of my advice is really to understand what the market is like, to read the kinds of books that you think you're trying to publish and understand who is buying mysteries and where you fit in the market, what your possible niche could be. So you really have to do a lot of market research.
Awesome. Well, if you're just tuning in, the show is The Artist Craft. I'm your host, Stacey Cochran, and we're talking with Mary Kay Andrews, the author of Deep Dish, which is available for sale from bookstores all around the country. Well, as we're beginning to wrap things up a little bit here on the set today, I'm sure you've answered these questions a million times before, but what is easier to write, romantic comedy or mysteries?
Well, you know, it's a big shifting of gears. Mysteries are very, very plot driven, so you sort of have to understand the mechanics of plotting. And I always thought mystery writing was the hardest thing that I would ever try to do. Then when I switched gears with the first book I wrote as Mary Kay Andrews, Savannah Blues, what I discovered was, once I started trying to write about relationships, I discovered that murder was easy. But relationships are really hard to understand.
And depict.
Yeah, and to depict, and I had never had to do that before. Usually with a mystery, once you've solved whodunit, you're done. When you're writing about relationships, you're never done, because the reader's wanting to know what happens. Do they hook up? Do they stay together? Why didn't they get together? Why didn't it work out? So it's a lot more complex.
Well, the guest for today is Mary Kay Andrews. We're just about out of time here. The book is Deep Dish, and like I said, there are so many things working well in this novel, from romance to comedy to contemporary, cooking shows, which are absolutely a hit right now. It seems like you're firing on all cylinders with Deep Dish. And I thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Stacey.
For all of us here at RTN Channel 10 and The Artist Craft, we thank you for tuning in. Thank you. And thank you.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
It was a lot of fun.
I enjoyed it.
I think we could have easily gone for an hour. I think I got like 3 of my questions from my cheat sheet. I have like 25.
Well, I talked too long, I'm afraid.
Oh, you did great. It was a wonderful interview.
Oh, thanks.
I'd love to be able to interview more HarperCollins authors. Maybe I should ask Leslie
talk to
about
Leslie.
that.
Yeah, just hit her with an email, and they send tons of people.
Our way.
Yeah, basically all I have to do is say, Renee, hook me up. Because, I mean, all of us are trying to get